The state of Kuwait celebrates today the 60th anniversary of its accession to the League of Arab States. In a pioneering step in the history of the Arab March, the Joint Arab Action, the promotion of Arab to Arab relations, and raising the Arab standing in international forums. The accession of Kuwait came after its independence, as the first order of the late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah is to submit an application to the League of Arab States. After declaring Kuwait's independence from Britain on June 19, 1961, Kuwait submitted the request to the Arab League on June 23, 1961 for getting a membership. The League approved the request on July 20th. At the time, Sheikh Abdullah Salim tasked the Director of Education, Abdulaziz Hussein, to deliver the request in order to ensure that Kuwait is an integral part of the Arab entity and to contribute to solidarity with the Arab countries. Kuwait tried to join the Arab League in 1958, but the move failed as the state was not independent at the time. After accepting the request of Kuwait to join the League, Secretary General for Political Affairs at the time, Dr. Sayyid Nufal, expressed his pleasure with Kuwait's joining the Arab family, asserting that Kuwait actually has enjoyed unofficially the membership of the League for a long time, either on political or social or cultural arenas. From the moment it joined the Arab League, Kuwait did not hesitate to support all aspects of strengthening Arab cohesion, whether inside or outside the halls of the League, through its wide leadership since independence to present day, with diplomatic efforts between the antagonists and bridging the Arab rift, in addition to adopting a balance and reaffirming the ties of cooperation.
أرفع تحياتي إلى مقام حضرة صاحب
I extend my greetings to His Highness the Amir Sheikh Nawaf al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah and to His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Mash'al al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, as well as the Kuwaiti government and people, and I am grateful for the opportunity given to me to talk on Kuwait's membership to the Arab League 60th anniversary. As you know, the Arab League is an organization that brings together countries with similar historical and societal heritage, and most importantly, countries linked together by religion and language. It was only natural that Kuwait was attentive to the organization at the onset of its independence and later joined the organization on the 20th of July 1961. Since then, Kuwait has played various grand roles in supporting the Arab League by all means and methods, by financially or by presenting the organization with distinguished Kuwaiti cadres and supporting it politically and morally. Most important of all is Kuwait's foreign policy throughout history, which is characterized by a positive neutrality as well as wisdom and balance, which gave Kuwait a position throughout which it could play important mediation roles between Arab countries.
حقيقة هذه ذكرى طيبة.
This is a joyous occasion in which we recall the great role played by Kuwait in facilitating joint Arab action for 60 years since its membership to the Arab League, during which Kuwait initiated and undertook many schemes in support of the process of joint Arab action. In fact, Kuwait had sincerely supported joint Arab action through its proposal of many initiatives adopted by Arab leaders as well as Kuwait's leaders during this period.
As for Arab League's stance over the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait, Egypt immediately called for an emergency Arab summit within 24 hours to discuss the crisis and offered to host the summit in Cairo. During the extraordinary summit, the League issued resolution number 195 on August 10, 1990, which condemned the Iraqi invasion and called on Iraq to abide by UN Security Council resolutions. The League confirmed Kuwait's sovereignty and independence at the summit, denouncing the Iraqi threats against Kuwait before issuing consecutive resolutions regarding the Kuwaiti prisoners and their compensation for damages caused by the invasion.
يأتي الدور الكبير أيضا لجامعة الدول العربية.
Indeed, Kuwait's role was influential in the Arab League. One of the great roles the Arab League played was during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, where the role the League played and decisions issued were very important in building the coalition and the international mobilization that ended with the liberation of Kuwait. The Arab League continuously played grand roles, and the Kuwaiti political leadership still stresses the importance of this organization.
On the other hand, Kuwait was keen on Iraq's exit from Chapter 7, which is to oblige Iraq to implement the international resolutions related to its invasion of Kuwait, in a step that is considered a concession by the Kuwaiti side in order to heal the Arab rift, and accordingly, 2013 witnessed Iraq's exit from that provision. With Iraq, Kuwait's vision of investing in peace and good neighbors showed the coherence of the Corps' future policy towards Iraq, despite the events that passed through it. Kuwait seemed interested in creating an area of economic and cultural prosperity with Iraq and supporting the Kuwaiti policy towards the investment and tourism towards the Iraqi destination. After IS rolled back from Iraq, Kuwait rapidly organized a conference to support the reconstruction of Iraq and pledged $100 million for the humanitarian needs of Iraqis and the reconstruction of liberated cities. The Donors Conference organized by Kuwait in February of 2018 was a milestone in the relations between Iraq and Kuwait. It was also the culmination of a long process supported by Kuwait to accept Iraq again in the Arab and Islamic incubator. Moreover, Kuwaiti contributions to the reconstruction of Iraq are another example of the state of Kuwait's endeavor to build bridges of cooperation and interdependence, to strengthen the Arab ranks, and Kuwait's financial aid extended through its economic and development funds to include its Arab neighbors, in the form of grants, development, and economic projects and loans, in its belief in the unity and Arab solidarity. From that standpoint, Kuwait hosted the first Arab Economic Development and Social Summit in 2009. It also hosted the Arab African Summit and 3 international donors conferences to support the humanitarian situation in Syria and other Arab initiatives.
تأثير الكويت في منهجية عمل.
Kuwait influences the work methodology of the Arab League with notions that advance and influence joint Arab action. One of these notions was the call of His Highness the late Emir, Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, for an economic summit. This newly generated idea was introduced to educate and inform the Arab citizens of the importance and positive impact of common Arab influence and political action. Kuwait then held an Arab Economic Summit in 2009, during which Kuwait issued the initiative to support small and medium enterprises, which represent one of the largest segments of Kuwaiti society, and that is youth. Since the establishment of the League in 1945 until now, the organization now enters the development stage of modernizing its structures and reviewing its methods of work. We are currently entering a stage aimed at developing the League's charter and the structure of joint Arab economic action, hoping that it will have a positive impact on the common Arab work in general.
Kuwait's continuous commitment to Arab-related causes is clearly represented by the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development. Since its foundation as the first Arab development institution in early 1960s, Kuwait Fund has continued to support development endeavors in Arab states by extending financial assistances, in addition to strengthen brotherhood and friendship bonds between Kuwait and Arab nations.
Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development was established in 1961 to assist Arab and other developing countries in implementing their economic and social program. Of course, through providing them with loans and technical assistance and grants. Up until now, the number of countries benefited from Kuwait Fund is more than 100 countries. And we are been able to contract to sign loan agreements with these countries, over 1,000 loan agreements. The total amount of loan agreements which has been provided to Arab countries and other developing countries, almost 6.7 billion Kuwaiti dinar. Kuwait development assistance to Arab countries starting back away before Kuwait independence. It started in when Kuwait government established the General Authority for South and Gulf region to assist in the early 1950s to provide financing for Oman, Yemen, and Emirates to establish and build schools and hospitals in this area. After the independence, and the Kuwait Fund, the Kuwait government has established the Kuwait Fund to assist the Arab countries. The first 15 years of Kuwait Fund, the role was to help the Arab countries first. And the first country who's benefited from Kuwait Fund assistance was Sudan. We have provided them with soft loans to finance railway projects. The amount was almost 7 million Kuwaiti dinar. Up until now, the number of loans that has been provided to Arab countries reached 370 loans, and the total amount that contracted with these countries, with the Arab countries, almost 3.8 billion Kuwaiti dinar, which represent almost more than 50% of Kuwait Fund lending to all its countries benefit from Kuwait.
Despite the difficulties and obstacles arising from the coronavirus pandemic, the Kuwait Fund was able to continue its role in assisting Arab countries with the aim of supporting their efforts to achieve their development goals and raise the standard of living of their people and societies. The fund continued its activities and cooperated closely during the pandemic with the Arab countries by providing soft loans and grants to support their efforts to achieve their development goals and improve the standard of living of their people and communities. During the pandemic, the fund managed to complete all the necessary procedures to sign 11 loan agreements, including 4 Arab countries, in financing projects in different economic and social sectors. Last year, the value of the loans to these countries stood at 142.1 million Kuwaiti dinars. In addition to loans, the fund also provided 4 grants to developing countries with a total value of about 40.8 million Kuwaiti dinars to finance technical and economic feasibility studies for various development projects, including the 4th grant, which values 39.3 million Kuwaiti dinars to support the Syrian refugees in the countries hosting them. In certain cases, the government of the state of Kuwait provides grants managed by the Kuwait Fund to finance urgent projects such as schools, hospitals, housing, and others, especially in countries where conflict prevails or those that are exposed to natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, and severe droughts.
Kuwait participated in the international conference to reconstruct of Iraq in 2019. And at that conference, Kuwait Fund pledges to finance, to provide loans, soft loans to Iraq in the amount of $1 billion over 5 years. Part of this loans will be 200 million of this loan. One of these loans, it's almost 200 million, will be dedicated to build schools in all over Iraq. So this role is very important. Kuwait Fund is willing to provide this kind of assistance, whether as a kind of a humanitarian relief or as a financing for reconstruction program after disaster that hits some of these countries.
The fund supervises the management of such grants and aid, which are subject to the same procedures it applies to the projects it contributes to financing, taking into account the nature and objectives of these projects. In addition, the fund contributed on behalf of the state of Kuwait to the resources of a number of regional and international development institutions, and was entrusted with the responsibility of managing grants provided by Kuwait directly to Arab countries and other developing countries.
Of course, there is other mean to help the Arab countries in the way of providing them with grants and technical assistance, either through grants from Kuwait Fund or administering grants provided by Kuwait government. Up until now, the number of grants provided to Arab countries, more than 100 grants, and the total amount was 270 million Kuwaiti dinars. Of course, Kuwait government also provide grants to Arab countries, which administered by Kuwait Fund. The total amount of grants provided by Kuwait government almost reached 2 billion Kuwaiti dinars, which represent almost more than 90% of all the grants provided by the government of Kuwait to Arab countries. Of course, there is other mean to help the Arab countries in the way of providing them with grants and technical assistance, either through grants from Kuwait Fund or administering grants provided by Kuwait government. Up until now, the number of grants provided to Arab countries, more than 100 grants, and the total amount was 270 million Kuwaiti dinars. Of course, Kuwait government also provide grants to Arab countries, which administered by Kuwait Fund. The total amount of grants provided by Kuwait government almost reached 2 billion Kuwaiti dinars, which represent almost more than 90% of all the grants provided by the government of Kuwait to Arab countries.
In addition to loans, the fund provided technical assistance to finance a variety of services to assist the beneficiary countries in financing activities that help them facilitate the implementation of their development processes, including financing the preparation of feasibility studies and expert services to assist in the planning and implementation of development programs and projects. Furthermore, the fund continued to monitor the implementation of projects financed by grants provided by the government of the state of Kuwait, including the grant provided within the framework of the Gulf Cooperation Council program to support development in each of the Kingdom Bahrain and Sultanate of Oman. The fund had also supervised the implementation of projects in both the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and the Kingdom of Morocco.
Because of the difficulties facing some of the Arab countries, namely Morocco and Jordan and Oman and Bahrain, in 2011, the GCC countries has agreed to provide them with financial assistance to these 4 countries. Under the framework of this agreement, Kuwait government has supported these 4 countries by providing them with grants and administered by Kuwait Fund. Oman and Bahrain has received 250 million US dollar. Jordan and Morocco also received 250 million dollar over the 5 years, starting from year 2011, 2012, 2013. All these grants has been administered by Kuwait Fund. We agree with the respected government to spend these grants on the infrastructure project and social projects. All these project has been implemented. All the amount has been dispersed to the respected government, and all the project has been implemented successfully over the 10 years with Bahrain and Oman, and 5 years with Jordan and Morocco. And they are very appreciated, and really this project helped to alleviate more the crisis they are facing at that time.
In this regard, the fund underscores its commitment to continue helping assistance to support developing countries to address the economic and social impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and meet sustainable development goals. At the end of 2021, the Kuwait Fund will have completed 60 years of development work, which included the provision of soft loans to finance development projects in various economic and social sectors, which are given priority within the development strategies and plans of the beneficiary countries.
ولعله يعني الكويت تحتضن واحد من أهم مؤسسات.
Kuwait is working vigorously to consolidate joint Arab action, and that is evident in it housing one of the most important institutions for joint Arab action, which is the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development. The fund greatly influenced and supported the development process of Arab countries, and it is still one of the most important institutions of joint Arab action that was initiated by Kuwait, who is one of the largest contributors. Previously, Kuwait demonstrated its major role through various proposals for donor conferences for Arab countries in support of joint Arab action. And I would like to mention one of these conferences that I personally attended, which is a conference to support Eastern Sudan after the signing of the peace agreement between the rebel movements. Kuwait had endorsed holding a conference to support Eastern Sudan, which became one of the most distinguished conferences that resulted in very tangible outcomes for every person in Sudan, that Kuwait closely follows up with the Sudanese government. Furthermore, Kuwait has held a number of conferences to support refugees, especially Syrian refugees, indicating the great interest that Kuwait bears for joint Arab action and support for Arabs.
Today, the Kuwait Fund forms a solid bridge of friendship and solidarity between the state of Kuwait and the developing nations. Kuwait's aid, either grants or development projects, economic or loans, has been extended through its economic and development funds to the Arab countries. In particular, the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development has been at the forefront in executing Kuwait humanitarian initiatives and Kuwait government's international obligations, especially to the Arab nation, in Palestine, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, in addition to Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt.
في المجال الاقتصادي وهو المجال الذي يعني
In the economic field, which I have the honor to chair in the Arab League, Kuwait has major significant initiatives, such as the initiative to hold a special economic, development, and social conference, which was one of the main conferences that took place in Kuwait and had great outcomes, such as the project to support Arab youth in small and medium enterprises. One of the most important proposals that took place in the conference that took place in Beirut was Kuwait's proposal and contribution to the establishment of a fund to support digital transformation and technology with an amount of $50 million. This fund is managed by the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development and is a step that shows that Kuwait's investment in the advancement of joint Arab action Furthermore, Kuwait has had a grand role in advancing Arab-African action through hosting the Arab-African Summit, in which many projects were presented to back investments in Africa. In fact, Kuwait has had sincere support for Arab and African work, as the implementation rate of projects supporting Arab African work rates about 98%, which shows that Kuwait's initiatives and proposals are practical and executable.
In line with the development goals and keeping pace with social developments and challenges, the fund's work strategically includes financing projects that contribute to achieving the Millennium Development Goals and human development projects such as health, education, and projects that contribute to reducing poverty. In addition to giving more priorities to sectors such as agriculture to contribute to food security and to finance the projects of local development banks and social funds for their role in supporting small and medium-sized enterprises and providing new job opportunities, as well as providing aid and assistance to countries afflicted by epidemics, natural disasters, and others arising from various wars and conflicts. And all of this clearly demonstrates the role played by the fund and the lofty mission it carries.
Kuwait Fund has contributed and will continue to contribute to the cause of the Palestinian people by providing them with grants to support their cause. There is two ways of assisting the Palestinian people in this regard. The first, over the period 2000-2019, Kuwait has provided 4 grants to the Palestinian people in Gaza and West Bank, in the total amount of 230 million US dollar to build schools, hospitals, roads. One of these grants, it's a very important grant, it's 200 million US dollar, was dedicated to Gaza Strip after to alleviate the suffering of the people after the Israeli aggression in 2015, which is kind of, and still it's grant is working to implement some of these projects, like housing project, hospitals, schools, road, and also agricultural project to the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip.
Kuwait has been the most generous country in terms of aiding Syria over the last 10 years. According to the UN Development Programme, Kuwait has taken a leading role in coordinating and contributing to the Syrian humanitarian crisis. Kuwait's official development assistance increased over time, including times of major crises. Kuwait has also hosted 3 consecutive conferences to raise funds in humanitarian support for Syria following its outbreak of war and chaos.
In the subject of Syrian crisis, Kuwait Fund has supported the Syrian refugees through its pledging in the international conference that has been held to support the refugees, the Syrian refugees, in 2014 and 15 and 16 and 2019. And Kuwait Fund is pledging these amounts to help the Syrian refugees, comes under the framework of the Kuwait government support to the Syrian refugees crisis. The total amount that Kuwait Fund participated in this almost 377 million US dollar, and this amount has been distributed to the refugees and the community hosting these refugees. And the countries that has been benefited from these grants, actually mainly is the 3 or 4 countries, which is Lebanon, which has the most refugees, Syrian refugees there in Lebanon, and Jordan, and Turkey, and Egypt and Iraq. All these countries has received the grants to build schools, roads, hospitals, wells, and shelter to the refugees people who is in these countries, and also to alleviate the suffering and alleviate the need to build the infrastructure in the hosting community, which has been affected by the increase of the refugees in these countries.
The Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development last year signed a grant agreement with the United Nations Children's Fund to provide $4 million to the organization's COVID-19 response in Syria in support of Syrian children and families. The fund's contribution provides the most disadvantaged and poverty-stricken children and families with continued access to essential health, nutrition, protection, education, water, and hygiene services, in addition to life-saving information on prevention and protection from COVID-19. Citing examples of the contributions, finance projects to improve infrastructure of housing facilities of Syrian refugees in Iraq's Kurdistan region and in Lebanon, UN Palestinian Refugee Agency projects in Gaza Strip, which included construction of schools. It also funded cancer treatment centers in Lebanon and Jordan.
Since the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic happened, Kuwait Fund was active in trying to alleviate the suffering of the people especially in the developing countries. There is many grants has been provided either outside Kuwait or inside Kuwait. The outside Kuwait, Lebanon, for example, Kuwait Fund has provided them with grants in a total amount of $1.2 million to try and support the government of Lebanon in trying to combat the disease by providing them with equipment and to try to alleviate the need or try to provide them with assistance in especially the hospitals and equipment needed for this kind of disease. Also, Jordan has received a grant from Kuwait Fund in the amount of $10 million actually to support their health center to try to provide them with equipment to alleviate the suffering of the people or who suffer from the COVID-19. One is by the amount of 1.2 million for the Syrian refugee in Lebanon to try to do some kind of project to help the Syrian living in Lebanon. And the other one is 2.4 million is also to alleviate the suffering of the Rohingya who is still living in the camp in Bangladesh. So total, this has been very successful cooperation with the Red Crescent. Also, Kuwait Fund has signed agreement with the Red Crescent in the amount of 2.5 million, also to the Rohingya and the cause for Rohingya to try to alleviate the suffering of the Rohingyas living in the camp in Bangladesh.
Under its wise leadership, the state of Kuwait was able to convey its experience to the needy and affected peoples, especially in the Arab world, provide numerous aids to them, and establish a large number of humanitarian and development projects, particularly in the countries which were exposed to natural catastrophes, through Kuwait Red Crescent Society. Kuwait Red Crescent Society is one of the leading Kuwaiti beacons in the field of humanitarian work, and it plays an integral role in activities and projects and is highly appreciated by a large number of international and regional organizations concerned with humanitarian work. After the Beirut port explosion, under the directives of His Highness Emir Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah, Kuwait Red Crescent Society ran an airlift of 18 planes, which transported more than 820 tons of food and relief aid and health supplies in terms of relief and health assistance to the Lebanese people. Since the first day of the explosion, Kuwait Red Crescent Society began to follow up the developments of the events and the situation on the ground in Lebanon and their humanitarian repercussions on people's lives. Kuwait Red Crescent Society also initiated to rehabilitate a number of apartments damaged by the port explosion that occurred in August of 2020, and to contribute to the restoration of the outpatient clinic building in the Children's Cancer Hospital. Regarding Kuwait's role in supporting the Arab issues, the state of Kuwait has been keen on backing the Palestinian cause, the core issue of Arabs, in international arenas through demanding the halt of Israeli aggression and recognizing legitimate rights of Palestinians. Right after the recent brutal occupation aggression on Gaza Strip, Kuwait government with Kuwait charity associations also launched an urgent relief campaign to support the Palestinian people, which raised 2.33 million Kuwaiti dinars. It seeks to rebuild Gaza within the framework of the humanitarian work pursued by the Kuwait Red Crescent Society in providing relief to afflicted peoples in various countries of the world. Kuwait Red Crescent Society newly launched the COVID-19 vaccination campaign for Syrian refugees in Lebanon and vowed to provide Lebanon, Syria, and Palestinian refugees with coronavirus vaccines. Moreover, the state of Kuwait has extended aid to Palestine in its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic through the World Health Organization and its specialized agencies, as yet another step to its humanitarian initiative. The World Health Organization in turn delivered ventilators to Gaza hospitals amid a spike in COVID-19 infections that has tested the Palestinian territory's underdeveloped health system. The donation of the intensive care devices funded by Kuwait came following a call to alleviate overwhelming cases in hospitals within the territory. More on the Kuwaiti political support, which appeared remarkably when the National Assembly Speaker Marzouk Ali Al-Ghanem conducted discussions about the Palestinian situation in light of the recent Israeli attacks on the Palestinians in Gaza, Jerusalem, and other parts of Palestine in the Belgian capital Brussels. As representative of the Arab Interparliamentary Union, he conveyed a message to the European Parliament about the continuous suffering of Palestinians and the aggression of Israel, especially against the Palestinians in Jerusalem and Gaza, that is considered the largest jail in the world. Kuwait last March also called upon the 46th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva to activate legal mechanisms to ensure holding the Israeli occupation accountable for its continuous violations of human rights of the Palestinian people and to prevent them from impunity. Kuwait has also been supporting the Palestinian people and government through providing financial aid. Kuwait also supported works of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees and its goals, which undergoes financial difficulties coupled with the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, I just want to mention that Kuwait Fund is continue to support the Arab countries and all the needy people in all over the world. Now we are trying to expand our operation in different mechanisms or ways, either by loans or technical assistance. So by expanding in the way of providing them with loans. So in the future, as you know, Kuwait Fund now has a strategy or a plan in the near future to provide loans over the 5 coming years, which is amount to 300 million Kuwaiti dinars, which is very substantial. Definitely Arab countries will have the share, lion's share of this contribution and on these loans, which is almost will be more than 50% of Kuwait Fund activity in the future.
Unfortunately, there are many Arab issues in the Security Council, and some of them have been around for many years, such as the Palestinian issue, and there are others that have been listed since the 70s and since 2011. Kuwait contributed to work in issues pertaining to Arab countries as a task requiring permanent coordination at different levels with the Arab missions in New York. The membership of the State of Kuwait in the Security Council, which actually began in January of 2018 and ended in December of 2019, constituted a new milestone in the path of affirming the stability of the values and principles that Kuwait believes in, which focuses on the Arab issues as one of its main priorities. During the non-permanent membership, Kuwait participated in working on issues related to Arab countries such as Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and Libya. The pivotal role of Kuwait also appeared in defending Arab issues in the Security Council, especially the situations in Iraq, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Lebanon, and Kuwaiti diplomatic activity extended beyond the Arab borders.
سمو الشيخ نواف الأحمد الجابر الصباح يعني حقيقة
His Highness the Emir Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah has followed in the same path of his predecessors in supporting the march of joint Arab action, and Kuwait is fully committed to its contributions to the Arab League. I can say with confidence that Kuwait is the first country to allot its contribution to the organization, which indicates Kuwait's importance to implementing joint Arab action. On the anniversary of Kuwait's membership to the Arab League, we convey our congratulations to the State of Kuwait, His Highness the Emir, the government, and people, affirming our appreciation of the great role played by Kuwait in supporting the process of joint Arab action. We highly value the great efforts made by Kuwait at the regional and international organizations level, as we follow the great role Kuwait plays through the United Nations and others that confirms Kuwait's imprint in international and regional politics, and I offer my greetings and felicitations to all the people of Kuwait and to us on this joyous anniversary.
The State of Kuwait, based on its original Arab stances and in accordance with its firm approach at the core of its foreign policy objectives, based on supporting joint Arab action, will spare no effort in preserving Arab interests and defending Arab causes. Since joining the Arab League in 1961, Kuwait played an integral role in supporting Arab causes, whether on the regional or international arenas. Kuwait played a crucial role within the Arab context, helping in bolstering relations among Arab nations, as well as boosting the status of the Arab League internationally.
وجهت الكويت جل اهتمامها في رفع المعاناة.
Kuwait directed most of its attention to alleviating the suffering of people, and as such it's excelled in this role, marking the state of Kuwait a center for humanitarian action, and His Highness the late Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed the title, the leader of the humanitarian action. Kuwait continues its support for the Arab League financially, politically and morally, and that is imperative for our presence within this bloc, which is one of the pillars that represent Kuwait's foreign policy. Of course, the sovereign leadership, headed by His Highness the Emir Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah, continues in the distinguished Kuwaiti-wise methodology that is always call for an open dialogue and non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, as well as playing a positive mediation efforts and supporting the Arab League. The state of Kuwait's devotion lies in the importance of its work and the fact that the Arab League is one of the main organizations in which Kuwait's foreign policy is based on.